Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. We are going to talk about a number of incumbent state representatives who everyone thought were with Dade Phelan, but are not willing to say it and are actually waffling when asked by their own constituents where they stand on the speaker's race. We're also going to talk about some really desperate actions being taken by the Dade Phelan, Greg Bonnen, Dustin Burrows faction of the GOP to try to keep their power. Pretty desperate, and really, again, just reveals how bad of a position they are in right now. And then we're going to close with overviewing an excellent decision by the Texas Supreme Court that was made in the Robert Roberson case and the significance of what that means for our three branches of government and the preservation of the rule of law. Let's get to the show. It's been a heck of a week. I think I've promoted several drinks here lately, but I actually had time to make my own coffee this morning, so that's what I'm drinking. I woke up this morning, and my 17-month-old daughter had thrown up in her sleep. And so when I left to come here to record, she was literally like clinging to me, begging for me not to go because she just feels sick and just wants to be cuddled. So that's unfortunate. And I will be wrapping this up and heading back home as soon as I can so I can spend some time with her. We have just been dealing with a ton of stuff. My body always crashes right after the election cycle. I wake up the day after the election. I had like swollen lymph glands and a sore throat and didn't feel good. And then lost my voice and went and got one of those IVs actually, which I'm a huge fan. I've done like 3 in my life, but I feel like I've done all 3 of the IVs in the last 18 months. So now I'm on this 4-month kick, 6-month kick of taking these, but feel like $1 million. The first time I did it was I was actually on my way up to DFW for a meeting, and it was a bunch some elected officials and some operatives and various people that I had asked to come together. This was actually following the Ken Paxton impeachment. So there was a conversation we were having about kind of what could be done to take advantage of all the energy that was out there. All of these conservatives that clearly had their eyes opened to how bad Austin was. So we're having this meeting. It emailed people and texted people and gotten a location figured out. And so we're all going to get together. And I'm the one who's asked everyone to come together. And then I am sick as a dog the day before. And I'm sitting there going, I don't know what I'm going to do. But everyone's going to show up to this meeting, and I'm supposed to tell different people things, and I've kind of assigned different talks to different individuals. They're all going to show up. This is going to be bad. So I drive up there, and I call a mobile IV place. And I'm like, this has got to help. And I had them give me like a vitamin B sack and one of those like Myers vitamins. It's like zinc and C and D and all sorts of other stuff and electrolytes, and they just pump you up. So I felt like $1 million. Everybody shows up, and this guy shows up to the meeting location with mobile IV thing, and everybody's walking in going like, what is happening to Luke? I look like a cancer patient. I was just beefing myself up with all this liquid to be able to have a productive 2-hour meeting and then go home. So, anyways, we've been sick since election day. I'm not kidding. My daughter Emmy got a stomach bug. Then my son had just a sore throat and he had a fever. And then our baby Leo is 5 weeks old, and for the last 8 days he's been so congested. He can't hardly sleep, and he's got to sleep kind of up. So he's on you all night, and mostly with my wife. And he's got a nurse because that's how he can keep his airways open or something. It's been very interesting. And then Vesper, who had really bad congestion for the last 2 weeks, has now woken up this morning with some stomach problem and is throwing up. So keep the Macias household in your prayers. I'm going to cover what we are going to cover today quickly so that we can, so that I can get home. Let's go. Here's the deal, guys. I tweeted out a text message that was sent. And originally, when this thing got sent, I thought that it came from Will Metcalf because I was actually emailed by a follower of the show. So thank you. And I protected his identity because he's a constituent of Mr. Metcalf's, but he reached out and said, hey, I just got this text message from Will Metcalf. He actually emailed me. If you're not on my email list, you can go to LukeMacias.com, sign up there, and just get a weekly email from me. So he emails back and says, hey, I just got this text message from Will Metcalf. And I'm going to read it for y'all here. President Trump's historic victory has united conservatives like never before and added millions of new voters to our ranks. Unfortunately, false flag organizations with conservative-sounding names are trying to make you believe the Texas House is somehow not Republican. That's fake news. All caps, fake news. State Rep Will Metcalf was overwhelmingly reelected because of his proven conservative record of massive property tax cuts, securing the border, protecting women's sports, supporting school choice, and banning gender modification surgeries. These false flag organizations, funded by a few West Texas billionaires, are attempting to fool you. They don't want to reform the Texas House. They want to control it for their own benefit. For President Trump to be successful, Texas must be successful. That's why Will Metcalf and the conservative Texas House majority need your help to stop those only interested in misleading conservatives. And then they put a link in there to donate to Will Metcalf. So he sends me this text and says, hey, Will Metcalf sent this text out. Now, we later found out that it was actually sent out from HRBC, which is the Houston Regional Business Coalition. Their top two donors for HRBC are Texans for Lawsuit Reform and Dick Weekly. So it is a very closely aligned group to TLR and Dick Weekly. But that's the Houston Region Business Coalition. They sent it in Mano de Ayala's district and Will Metcalf's, I'm assuming Lacey Holes and other people like that. Now, the interesting thing is, you just think about the framing that these guys are using. They first say, we're all united, Trump got elected. By the way, there are conservatives that are telling you, Ken Paxton, there was a text sent out with Ken Paxton. Donald Trump said anybody who supports Dade Phelan should be disassociated from the Republican Party. That's a direct quote from Donald Trump. So what's happening is, as grassroots organizations communicate to Republican voters and say, hey, reminder, Donald Trump said, don't vote for Dade Phelan. You should be disassociated from the Republican Party if you do. Ken Paxton, who's probably one of the most popular attorney generals in the country, and I will tell you, because I've looked at a lot of internal polling, Ken Paxton just continues to get more and more popular with Republican voters. Hands down. Hands down. The left hate him. Democrats can't stand him because they know that he's working really hard for Republican values. So there's a text message sent out with Ken Paxton, and these Republicans are all on defense. And so the framing that they take is, we just got Donald Trump elected. Republicans are united, except for these people that are coming in and telling us not to elect liberal Dade Phelan. Like, that's your pitch? Is, no, we need to keep the guy who's only going to get elected if he does get elected with Democrats. His only hope and path is to convince 62 Democrats and then to convince 14 Republicans. And he doesn't have either of them right now. We'll get into that in a second. So the constituent also sends a concerned email to Will Metcalf saying, like, I don't know why you're saying all this. And Will's response is very telling. And I will read that for you here. He says, thank you for emailing me about my text. The text message that went out Friday did not come from my campaign and was not authorized by me. It was sent to many members, districts across the Houston area without our knowledge. We were able to determine by the political disclaimer on the text that it was sent out by HRBC PAC, the Houston Region Business Coalition. As you can see on the attached image, I am not familiar with this organization and let them know over the weekend that I do not support these messages going out of my district. I appreciate you reaching out on this matter, and I look forward to continuing to serve Montgomery County with the strong conservative leadership I deliver for our community. God bless you, your family, and the great state of Texas. Sincerely, Will Metcalf. Now, I think that's a pretty honorable reply from Mr. Metcalf. I don't always agree with Will in all of his positions, and he has been a longtime ally of Dade Phelan. And for all we know, he might still be. But I will say that his communication back to his constituent does not imply that he is with Dade. I mean, he had the opportunity to say, by the way, Dade is a conservative leader and I will be supporting him for re-election. He did not say that. And that actually gets into our second example. So, which is kind of funny because HRBC also sent a text message into Mano de Ayala's district. But yesterday, there was an event that Mano attended, and at that event, he was asked a question, okay? The questioner said, many of us are not in favor of having Dade Phelan as the Speaker of the Texas House, so I'm hoping that you will make a decision that will go along with what many of us want as far as Speaker. And that was their question, okay? Basically, we don't like Dade. What's your position? Here's what Mano says. And it is very kind of jarbled. You can tell that it's kind of funny. It's like some of these Republicans don't think when they go out, they're going to get asked this question because they don't seem to be ready to respond. So Mano's response is, I appreciate the sentiment, which is interesting because the sentiment he's talking about is the sentiment like a bunch of us don't want Dade. He's like, I can appreciate that. So at least Mano acknowledges like, yeah, this guy's pretty rough. I can promise you this. This is from Mano. I can promise you this. I'm gonna vote for the most effective conservative speaker for this session coming up. And I promise you that, and I will do something that some of my colleagues haven't done. And that is whoever we elect to the House of Representatives by the rules the party gave us, I will vote for that speaker on the House floor. Okay. So again, Mano's asked directly. Now, I will tell you privately, I am aware that Mano has told different people that he's voting for Dade in the caucus on December 7th. And this is going to get to a little bit of an explanation of the math for Dade. There are members that are going to go in and potentially write Dade Phelan's name on their secret ballot and put it in. But a majority of them have already endorsed David Cook, 45 of the 88. And so some of these guys that are planning on going in, they might tell a couple people like, well, I'm going to vote for Dade. But they also don't know if Dade's going to win. He needs 53 votes to win. He can't get there. And if somebody else gets 53 votes, which David Cook is in the best position to do and has made commitment to a lot of these reforms, then Mano is basically saying if David Cook gets to 53, I'm his 54th vote. I'm automatically with him, whoever wins the caucus, which is why a lot of people on Dade's team are working very hard to try to make sure no one wins that meeting's vote. Here's their goal. Their goal is on December 7th, when the Republican caucus gets together, that nobody ever gets to 53. And they're trying to keep a lot of their colleagues scared enough to just not vote for anybody that could get 53. That's their goal. They want to keep the reform side of the caucus from getting 3/5 of the vote so that everybody does not have their hands tied going into the first day of the legislative session. But here's the important thing to understand about where these guys are at. None of these people can say why they're voting for Dade Phelan. None of them. Go to Cole Hefner's page. Everyone says Cole's one of Dade's biggest champions. He has not posted since the election why he's voting for Dade Phelan. Neither has Jared Patterson. Neither has Jeff Leach. Nobody is taking a public position that for the speaker. Nobody is saying I'm proud to be with the speaker, or that they even are with the speaker, let alone being proud to be with him. That is how bad things are for Dustin Burrows and Greg Bonnen and Dade Phelan. And this group of people that have run the Texas House are trying very, very desperately to keep their power. Their hope is that they can convince 62 Democrats to keep them in power, and then they can go convince 14 Republicans to fall on their sword to get them to 76. But here's the problem, and I think you all agree. If 14 Republicans or 18 or 20 go and cut that deal, there will be hell to pay at the next election cycle. That's what will happen. And so they have to go to these Republicans that, like a Mano, let's say Mano goes in and writes Dade's name down on a piece of paper and puts it in as a secret ballot vote. Great. If Dade Phelan doesn't get 53, he's like, well, I'm not with Dade Phelan anymore. That's how it works. If they go to Mano and say, we want you to be one of 14 people that go with us all the way to the floor to cut a deal with the Democrats and get us to 76 votes on the first day of session, Mano's going to say, you're out of your minds. I will be thrown out of my district. I held on this time. A bunch of people will leave me. My donors, my supporters, people who had yard signs in their yard, people I go to church with, they're not going to support me if I do that. And so Dade doesn't know how to keep his power, and Dustin Burrows and Greg Bonnen don't know how to keep their power, and they're just trying to figure out how to leverage the Democrats without actually having to use them, because they're not even sure they could if they tried. Now, could they? Yes. 14 Republicans, all it takes is 14 of the 88 to say, kind of to heck with it. We're going anyways. And if they do that, we can't stop them. You can't control people, and you should not try. This is just something that I'm going to encourage you to understand. You don't control people. Okay? You can control yourself through self-government and discipline. You can help inform your neighbors and your citizens with information that creates a better environment for the right thing to happen. But if 14 Republicans say, I don't care, I want to empower the Democrats and have a basically bipartisan running of the Texas House, a uniparty system like we've had, I want to keep it. You can't stop them. Those 14 people are going to do it. But they don't have the votes right now. They don't have 14 people willing to fall on their sword, because a lot of those people don't think they'd come back. They don't think they could survive, which is good. And that's the work that all of you have done. Every one of you. Some of you have block walked, some of you have donated, some of you have gone out there. You've created an environment where these Republicans know if we go empower Democrats, we will be held accountable. Also yesterday, a fake group called Texans for Conservative Leadership. Now, it's leader and then like a space and then ship is what I think. This fake group was started because there is a very conservative PAC called Texans for Conservative Leadership. And so they started what it looks like, and there's a lot of unknowns right now, but what it looks like is there's this fake group that was started called Texans for Conservative Leader, Space, Ship. I call it like the Titanic, because Dade Phelan kind of seems like the Titanic right now. But, you go, okay, there's this fake group, and then they started shooting text messages out attacking David Cook. And they did this kind of cute thing where they tried to take a conservative group in Texas and act like they were them to say, hey, there's conservatives that are actually attacking David Cook. I think the most notable thing that has come to light is that your large establishment players in Austin, like Texans for Lawsuit Reform and Associated Republicans of Texas, do not feel comfortable at this time going in and publicly taking positions for Dade and against David Cook. And that's super helpful. At some point they would like Dade to stay in power ultimately. But the fact that they don't feel comfortable sticking their neck out tells you exactly how Austin insiders feel about where Dade is at right now. Now, none of this means Dade is going to be guaranteed to not get reelected. None of it means that Dade's definitely gone. Just to be clear, it doesn't mean that. Texans United for a Conservative Majority have put up a whip count, and I'll put a link in the description, but and in my email I'll put a link there too. But they have the known supporters of David Cook, the known supporters of Dade Phelan, and then unknown support, the 30 some odd Republicans that we don't know where they are. That includes Hillary Hickland and Janie Lopez and Jay Dean and Jeff Leach and Gary Van Dever and Carl Tepper, Angela Orr, all these people in the middle. A lot of work needs to be done between now and December 7th, and you should be making sure that your state representative knows, if they're not already opposing Dade Phelan, that there is no scenario in which they can vote for Dade or Dade 2.0. And you should always say that, because there's a lot of Republicans out there that if they don't vote for Dade, what they're looking for is a Dade 2.0 option, which is why they're not supporting David Cook right now. They want to continue with the same structure, just a different face and a different name. And so if Dade can't make it, they're going to try for a Dade 2.0 option. And you should call, if your state representative is either supporting Dade or unknown, I would do that. If your state representative is supporting David Cook against Dade Phelan, I would just at least reach out to them and actually ask them where they're at and why they're doing it. Why are you supporting Dade? And do you know that this is my position on this? So with that being said, I will conclude kind of the overarching observation of the speaker's race to let you know that I would rather be on the reform side of the Texas House than the status quo right now with the environment. It doesn't mean we're guaranteed the results we want and that the Texas House will become an actual Republican body, but it does mean that the momentum is good and that each and every one of you who have put effort into that have been able to affect things in a positive direction. With that, let's take a quick break and come back and talk about the Supreme Court's ruling.
Hey folks, Chris Salcedo here. I've got something special for you, the Salcedo Storm podcast. As your friendly, liberty-loving Latino, I bring you a mix of engaging discussions to help us fight for our state and our conservative values. It's the perfect way to stay informed and engaged in what's happening around you. So, what are you waiting for? Don't miss out on the storm of information and entertainment coming your way. The Salcedo Storm podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Now let's talk about the Supreme Court's ruling on the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee's actions in the Robert Roberson death penalty case. Now, before I talk about this, I always like giving a disclaimer. We're not going to get graphic or anything, but we are still talking about a very sad case regarding a violent crime against a child. And so if there are children listening, if you're listening to this in your car, driving around with your kids, then would recommend probably changing to a different podcast and coming back to this at another time. I'm going to read a couple excerpts from the Supreme Court's ruling, but let me again remind you what the situation is. And this is a case that has really captured Texas political conversations for the last several weeks, but essentially what you have is an individual, Robert Roberson, who has killed his daughter and killed his daughter 20 years ago. And so this man was convicted. He was judged by a jury of his peers. He was found guilty. He was put on death row. And then there were long, elaborate forms of appeals. And it went through the justice system. And so many judges have looked at this case and time again said, this is correct, this is correct, this is correct, we shall proceed. And then the Board of Pardons looked at it, and the Board of Pardons has made a number of extensions to that has granted or recommended extensions to the governor that I thought were unjust, that I believe let killers not receive the just penalty for their actions and for the crimes that they committed. But that being said, even that Board of Paroles and Pardons said, no, we are not recommending the governor extend this. And then even then, the governor could have extended and delayed the execution by 30 days, which effectively delays it 90 days. And he opted against it. And so the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee, under the leadership of Jeff Leach and Joe Moody, decided to heck with the rule of law. We're going to issue a subpoena and then tell the courts that our subpoena should delay his execution. And this was literally done the day that he would have been executed, or I guess the day before. And so the Court of Criminal Appeals rightfully rules, no, you can't delay an execution with a legislative subpoena. And the Supreme Court halts the execution. They don't rule in the House's favor, but they just say, basically, we want to take a quick look at this, and we don't know who has jurisdiction, so we're halting the execution. Now, they have now ruled in favor of the governor's position, the attorney general's position, and I would say a position that is consistent with the rule of law in the three branches of government, and completely slap down this rogue committee's actions. And I want to read a couple excerpts from the Supreme Court opinion for you to understand the significance of what this is. Tony McDonald, who's an attorney that many of conservatives work with, made a great observation when the Supreme Court originally stayed this, and they basically said, this committee basically can play endless games to make sure that this individual is not executed. And they can do this with anybody. I mean, everyone started talking about, like, if this happens, you're going to have the Innocence Project and George Soros paying Republican lobbyists to just go lobby a couple members on the committee to get them to issue a subpoena to every death row inmate right before their execution to stay the execution, right? And they just have to sit down with a couple of Republicans and say, are you sure beyond a reasonable doubt? And they're like, what? I'm not the jury. I'm just a legislator, but I guess I am not. Boom. They get them to vote. So it's pretty sad. So here's what the court ultimately ends up doing, and I applaud the Texas Supreme Court for their ruling. So here's a couple excerpts. The court has received submissions from the parties and multiple amici, I guess. I'm not a lawyer, okay, but amicus briefs, multiple amicus briefs. We conclude that under these circumstances, the committee's authority to compel testimony does not include the power to override the scheduled legal process leading to an execution. We do not repudiate legislative investigative power, but any testimony relevant to a legislative task here could have been obtained long before the death warrant was issued, or even afterwards, but before the execution. Accordingly, our decision to deny relief is based not on a lack of jurisdiction, but on the merits. If the legislature lacks a judicially enforceable right under these circumstances, no lawful basis exists to support a civil court's grant of injunctive relief. That's the core conclusion. Okay. The core conclusion is, hey, you guys wanted to use your subpoena power to stop an execution. And we did stop it because we just didn't even know what the right answer was. But now we're giving you the right answer, not only for the Robert Roberson case, but for every case moving forward. Never, ever, ever step out of your lane when it comes to what the three branches of government are and how they operate. So let me read a couple other excerpts. On page 8 of the opinion, it says, despite its high profile and emotion-laden subject matter, this case is not analytically different for jurisdictional purposes. Indeed, the basis for our jurisdiction is especially palpable here because of the antecedent merits question of which branch may determine if or when a lawful execution takes place. The judicial branch, including the state's highest court for criminal law matters, has determined that Roberson should be executed. The executive branch has determined that clemency is unwarranted and thus seeks to carry out the judiciary's command, which was a warrant issued at the request of a prosecuting attorney. This is called the rule of law, by the way, in case you're wondering. But the legislative branch contends that its subpoena for Roberson to testify before a committee requires subordinating the death warrant and the executive branch's refusal to delay enforcing it. Thus, the district court's death warrant for October 17th and the committee's subpoena for October 21st were mutually exclusive commands. The department could not obey both. So this is just a legalese way of saying this is the conflict. There's the rule of law and the Texas House Committee that came in and said, hey, we are the judge, jury, and executioner. Okay? We are all of it. And until we tell you you're allowed to move forward, you can't. It doesn't matter what the judicial and executive and prosecutorial branches of our government say. Until this House committee is here, you're not moving. I think that it is then well worth it to read a couple other little excerpts from this opinion. Here it says, to be clear, the court plays no role. This is on page 18, bottom of it. To be clear, this court plays no role in the adjudication of criminal cases. An individual's guilt or innocence, the weight of the evidence, the propriety of the sentence, and other such criminal law matters are final upon the determination of the Court of Criminal Appeals. One of the things I appreciate throughout this different opinion is that it simply stated a lot of things that are kind of the pillars of how a just society operates. At the top of page 18, it says, it's actually talking about the committee's subpoena power, the legislative power, right? And here's the conclusion. Broad as it is, the power is not, however, without limitations. As the Supreme Court has explained, the legislative branch, quote, may only investigate into those areas in which it may potentially legislate or appropriate, and its investigations must respect the separation of powers. Duh. Do you understand what the court just said? If you want to legislate or appropriate, you can subpoena anybody, but that's not what this committee said they needed to do. The committee said, we need to subpoena this guy to determine whether he's guilty or innocent. They think they are the law, right? They think they are judge, jury, and executioner, right? And that's what the Supreme Court is saying. Hey, you can have a committee, you can subpoena somebody, but your powers are limited. That's the idea of limited government. Then it says, after all, the other branches of government are not adjuncts of the legislature, much less of a single committee of one house of the legislature. And by interfering with a legal process ordained by the legislature itself, a committee's actions, if capable of blocking an execution, could in fact impair the prerogatives of all three branches. We addressed each of these conflicts in turn. So I really do appreciate that paragraph of the Supreme Court's opinion. I thought it was incredibly well articulated. And we're going to close with this takeaway from their arguments. This is on page 21, if you do find the opinion. So Jeff Leach and Joe Moody put out this statement after the court ruled, and they said, we are glad the court ruled that our subpoena power is correct, and we will subpoena Robert Roberson, which is a total gaslighting of the general public in Texas, by the way. It's pretty funny because it's not true. They didn't win. They acted like, we won. We can subpoena. That's not what they asked the Supreme Court. They didn't say, hey, Supreme Court, can you rule on whether we have subpoena power? Because the court said, yeah, you have subpoena power. Aha, we won. No, you halted an execution. And the Supreme Court basically came back and said, the only reason we let you halt this execution was because we had never had this question come to the court before, and we had to actually answer it. We're answering it now. You can never, ever, ever, ever do what you did again. Never do it. And if you do, we'll slap you down immediately because you acted outside your authority. This next section is, I think, one of the best sections as well. The committee argues, this is the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee under Jeff Leach and Joe Moody. They're before the court arguing. So Leach and Moody, essentially. The committee argues that there is no intractable conflict here. No conflict here, merely a temporary overlap that can be accommodated without infringing on either branch. So the committee says, hey, we just need to subpoena him and then they can kill him. They can follow through with the execution, right? Unfortunately, this is the court. Unfortunately, we cannot take such a sanguine view. This is not an instance of two ships passing in the night. It involves multiple ships demanding the same moorings at the same dock. A circumstance that, if unchanged, promises a head-on collision. We now proceed to determine which ship must yield the right way. Fantastic. And the final part that we're going to read is on page 21. Finally, it is mistaken to regard a subpoena from a legislative committee as the only relevant legislative interest. This is another incredible point. I know this is getting kind of in the weeds, but it's actually, I think, really important for where we are moving forward and understanding the rule of law. As if the legislature's sole goal would be, this is from the opinion, would be to vindicate obtaining testimony at any cost. To the contrary, we have confirmed the validity of subpoenas seeking legislative testimony, which is what people like Joe Moody and Jeff Leach say, oh, they gave us right to subpoena. It's like, you already had that right, you doofuses. That's not what you asked. It says, we've confirmed the validity of subpoenas seeking legislative testimony, but in at least some context, perhaps this one most starkly, Such a subpoena could interfere with the legislature's own previously stated directives. The capital punishment context presents a particularly detailed legislative scheme. It's the legislature that made capital murder a crime. Texas Penal Code 19.03. Provided for the penalty, 12.31, 1903, determined the method of execution, Texas Code Criminal Procedure, 4314, placed restrictions on the scheduling of executions, 43141, and authorized the issuance of death warrants, Article 4315. Changing the law to restructure the criminal justice system requires the consent of both houses of the legislature, along with either the governor's approval or a sufficient legislative supermajority to override his veto. For one legislative committee to achieve that outcome unilaterally, and especially through a power that would allow it to achieve that result systematically in any or all capital cases, would mean that the committee could in practice supersede the larger legislative will, not just that of other branches. More simply, a legislative committee that thwarts an otherwise lawful execution also thwarts the legislature's own command that the laws be enforced. You can go read all 31 pages of this opinion. I don't think you need to. I think I've given you the highlights. Here's the great thing about the Supreme Court's action. This rogue committee's actions threatened foundational pillars of society. If you created a system where George Soros could fund through the Innocence Project a mountain of lobbyists to get a single committee chaired by a Democrat appointed by Dade Phelan to stop any execution that they hadn't decided should be stopped, outside of our entire system of government and all of the branches, it would be chaos. That's chaos. So I'm grateful that the Supreme Court took action. And I don't think anybody planned on spending the last month talking about this case. But to have the Supreme Court come in and slap this committee down and say, don't ever do that again, is very encouraging when it comes to putting a Texas House that often acts outside of its authority in a box. When we talk about reform in the Texas House, we're talking about making the Texas House Republican again by letting it focus on the things that it was there to do, which is legislate and enact laws and protect citizens through legislating. That's what it should be doing, appropriating and legislating. And there's so much that it could do. But when you give Democrats all this power, and now you have these Democrat-run committees that say we are the judge, jury, and executioner in all death penalty cases from here on out, it's incredibly dangerous and sets up our state to be in utter chaos. So the Texas Supreme Court's actions are really important for you and for me, and I am very grateful for the opinion they issued this week. I hope you have a blessed week. I hope you're super encouraged by all the appointments coming out of Donald Trump's administration, for all the work getting put in. Bills are being filed. 2 years ago, don't quote me on this. I mean, I'm saying it, but it's okay. Don't quote me. I think there were like 600 or 700 bills filed on the first day of filing 2 years ago. There were like 1,600 bills filed on the first day of filing this time. It is a lot more. We could have 3,000 or 4,000 more pieces of legislation this session than we had last session. And a lot of it is very conservative, setting the tone and the tenor for one of the most successful conservative sessions ever. But that only happens if all of us stop and consider, if every one of us stop and consider the fact that if we chill out, we're going to squander all the victories we've had. You have to realize that you need to still continue to push if we're going to continue to get legislative wins. My dad would always tell me growing up that I always wanted to run before I caught the football. When we were playing in the backyard, I'd run this route, and so he'd show me the route. I want you to run up and then go over, and then I'm going to catch you in that corner. So I'd go, and he'd throw. And almost every time I dropped the football, my dad would say, "Luke, stop trying to run before you catch the football. Catch the football and then run." And that's the way I see elections and then legislating. You have to catch the football and then you have to run. Imagine catching a football, looking and having a wide open field in front of you, and then just taking a knee. Well, at least I made 25 yards. That's pretty awesome, more than you usually make. And then going, wait a second. You had another 25 yards you could have run and got a touchdown. Do you want a touchdown session? That only happens if you keep pushing. That's where we're at. And I hope you recognize that and are ready to be more engaged than ever this legislative session. May God bless you, and may God bless the great state of Texas.